Welcome to Love and Life. I'm Dr. Karin Anderson-Abril here with my co-host,
Pastor Elliott Anderson.
And Love and Life is your place to hear conversations grounded in psych research, psychotherapy,
and biblical truth
to help us thrive in love and life.
Hello, Love and Life family. It's Pastor Elliott here with producer Tim. We are flying solo today. Karin and Dan are out celebrating and connecting with family in California. So actually floating near your area there somewhere, Tim.
Somewhere close by.
Have you heard her singing or anything yet? Just hear echoes
faintly,
of her
faintly
in the distance. So in continuation of the movements we've talked about within trauma recovery, and then specifically within the context of our words and our phrases and how much that impacts identity, healing, movement, freedom, I felt compelled this week to talk about that language, and in particular in marriage or dating, romantic partnerships, how important the theme of joining and partnership is within our phrases and our wording. So I know that's a little abstract, Tim. I'll give you a little start on this and then get your insight or thoughts on what would help you and our listeners be more concrete and more direct. So obviously my extremes in counseling for marriage is I'm normally prepping marriages for the wedding and the first years, or I'm working with them in the midst of great crisis. So I recognize there's an extreme here, but I have found the similarities between the two to be quite remarkable. And the instruction or the learning about the power of our words within the reality of recovery issues, those who've gone through trauma prior to marriage, those who have gone through trauma in marriage, or who are creating trauma together through their decisions in marriage, I found this to be very universally true. And so the first context or concept I want to throw out, Tim, for us is just the whole idea of we and us. It is very common in a relationship as intense and as intimate as marriage or a committed romantic relationship, to, as much as we enjoy the connection of that and the bonding of that and the unity of that, when we argue or when we're frustrated or when we're hurt, to actually go way more individualistic than a couple would do in an early dating scenario. And let me give you an example. So our spouse texts us something that bothers us. Never happened to any of us, of course, and I've never sent stupid texts myself. But a spouse sends us something and it catches us off guard and makes us feel a little defensive or a little frustrated. And besides the fact that we shouldn't text a whole lot more, because as soon as we're triggered off our normal window of tolerance, they call it, or our baseline of neutrality, as soon as we're triggered, the next text is going to escalate.
Yeah.
And what happens, Tim? What do we normally do? We come back with I don't like the way you said that, or what did you mean by that? Or I don't like your tone, or whatever that might be. Although, of course, reading tone in text is a whole nother scenario altogether.
Yeah.
So I think there's something about the vulnerability of the partnership, the vulnerability of the commitment, that when it's challenged in some way or some form and for some reason, we tend to respond accusationally or in an individualistic manner.
A few years ago, I started having trouble falling asleep, and I started taking melatonin because I thought it was a natural way to try to relax myself, calm myself down, and go to sleep. But it turns out that as a hormone supplement, melatonin can disrupt our other hormones and we can build up an immunity to it. So when we started partnering with the wellness company, I was super excited to try their melatonin-free sleep aid called Restful Sleep. It includes passion flower, chamomile, valerian root, among other herbs, and natural ways to help calm us down and get us ready to go to bed. I've been using it for a couple months now, and Restful Sleep helps my mind and body quiet themselves and ease into sleep. If you've ever had insomnia, you know how brutal it is. The wellness company's Restful Sleep can help. Head over to twc.health/lovelife and enter promo code LOVELIFE at checkout for 15% off your entire order. That's twc.health/lovelife and promo code LOVELIFE for 15% off your entire order.
Your thoughts on that initially before I dive into some other stuff?
Well, can I ask before that, what do you see that there's a role that gender plays in this, or temperament, in terms of who's most likely to maybe use that language? The
Yes,
I
for
language?
sure. Good, very good question, Tim. Yes, the more dominant personality style will tend to be more accusational or direct, and the accusational does not mean necessarily attacking them with the accusation, but rather just bringing it to the forefront, like a good defense attorney. So yes, I think there's that issue. Whoever has a little stronger personality, stronger accountability, who's a little more direct, who's a little bit more in the conflict animals, who's a little more sharky and owly, and likes to bring those things to the forefront quickly.
I can only speak from my experience, and neither my wife or I are sharky or owly.
Yeah. So you're both being indirect, right? And it's going on, and no one's really getting the word out, which at times is safer because you don't tend to hurt each other's feelings as much, but sometimes can mean we don't really get the issue on the table fully.
No, and just being transparent, like we've had counseling with you, and we've worked through a lot of those things, and you pointed out a lot of those things to us, and so, but I do think there is also, as someone who struggles with being a little more direct, I have found with some of that language that there are times where one of us is saying something, and not to pick on my wife, but sometimes she might say something like, I'm dealing with this, or I did this, or whatever, and I have to stop her and say, this is us, like this is our, not pointing it at a person.
Right.
Like, this is our problem. This is our issue to work through, and both of us play a role in that. So
absolutely.
It's not just one of us. So that's kind of...
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good example, Tim, also, and a recognition that it's, of course, regular and normal and even biblical and godly to occasionally miscommunicate and not understand each other. So there's no issue there. We're not saying that's a sin issue per se. But those first couple texts or words in a conversation are so important. And so one of the strategies, I teach, and I've said it on the air before as well, is statements rather than questions. And if you are wanting to seek clarification from a text, way better to ask for a phone call, or to not even ask, because the question can get us defensive and start us in retaliation or response, saying things, hey, can we table this until we can talk in person? Now you're not saying you just ticked me off, or I'm frustrated, or I'm hurt. You're just saying, let's not get into a text conversation.
And you're just talking about the context of texting, right?
In starting that way, yes.
Okay.
But the same thing is true. Occasionally, we don't have time to have a deep conversation about a possible misunderstanding or some hurt feelings in the middle of a birthday party with all the family. And so that's not normally the time to do an authentic, direct clarification, private conversation when there's kids running all over the place and mom and dad.
Yeah, when you said statements versus questions, I've always found that I try to lean more towards the questions. What did you mean by that?
Yes, I know you do. And I don't mean that negatively. That's just your spirit. And as an oldest,
is that maybe it's not a right or wrong thing, but is that I just find that can lower someone's defenses, because they usually explain, themselves versus feeling attacked or anything.
It depends on the relationship, depends on the person, your style, my brother's style, just two firstborns that are fairly strong in their firstbornness.
Yeah.
Tend to ask questions as the clarifiers, but it often comes out as, from my position or from my authority, you didn't make sense, or you didn't clarify, so could you let me know, please? It seems almost like, hey, I'm in charge here, so just make sure you communicate this better. And I know that's not your intent a majority of the time. But that's why the statement of something like, let's say there's a miscommunication, Tim, and you're seeking clarification. So, and you ask a good question, like you're trying to ask something like, well, Abby, could you kind of explain that position for me better? That's a pretty calm, quiet, indirect, non-confrontational question.
Yeah.
But a statement, I think, could be even better.
Okay.
So a statement like this, Tim, which says the exact same thing as the question I just gave you as an example. Hey, I'd love to talk about this more later so we can understand each other better.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a joining
Yeah.
statement,
Yeah.
right? So the question's not wrong, your example,
No, I hear you.
but the statement is way better in bringing symmetry and harmony into a potential scenario. And all of us have been there, that what starts as a benign, simple ask for clarification gets defensive, gets into posturing and positional, and maybe even some hurt words, especially if it's just texting the whole time, because that gets very difficult to interpret and understand meaning. And according to the communication research, texting is like second to last in, like, behind smoke signals for ineffective communication.
I used to write books to people going off about things, and I just realized this doesn't help.
Yeah, normally it's the way I teach it, Tim, is normally facts and important content information updates. Hey, running late, meeting's going long, hun. I'll be 6:15 instead of 6. That's a nice text. Mm-hmm. You don't want to leave the meeting. Hey, can I call my wife for a minute right in the middle of the meeting? So you quickly go down your phone. That's a good text.
Yeah.
So that's the way I coach it, especially if you have a history as a couple or as a relationship, having some misunderstandings and some issues with direct versus indirect communicators, or external communicators with an internal communicator. Because external communicators via text or even phone or even in person, person-to-person communication, they're figuring out what they believe and what they think as they talk. Right?
Yeah.
You watch Karin and I do that all the time. We're figuring out even how the show's going. We're figuring it out as we go because we're both very external communicators.
Yeah.
You're internal.
Yep.
My wife is internal. By the time she gets to a conversation or you get to something or you're asking Karin and I a question, I know you've already thought a ton about it. And so I'm not hearing when you email Karin and I or something, I'm not hearing your questions as a random spontaneous processing event. You've thought it through. You've made some intentional word choices to try to help move us, stir us, call us to accountability, whatever you're having to do as the producer.
Psychoanalyzing me, Elliott.
No, but it's just true.
Yeah.
But it's funny. Sometimes Karin receives those as you just processing because she's such an external processor and she's really, really good at it.
Yeah.
She can get clarity fast. And so that's always funny to me. And sometimes when we're in one of these three-way texts of exchanging information and processing and scheduling.
You're just sitting back laughing, huh?
I am literally laughing when you guys are talking back and forth because you're talking indirect, thought out, executed style movements. Karin's still processing and brainstorming. And so you guys are going back and forth. And it doesn't lead to a lot of tension because you guys love each other, you understand each other, and it's not a big deal. But in a marital dynamic or romantic partnership relationship, that could cause a lot of frustration. Yeah. And so to get back to your very question, the temperament, the personality, the birth order, our conflict style, our history of challenge in a relationship, what we grew up in, what we haven't grown up in, all those make a big, big difference. That's why, to me, Tim, even though your questions are not poor, bringing more statements into the conversation with Abby or your children, I think it helps with children a lot too. You know, instead of, what were you thinking? Hey, walk me through the process a little bit. Same exact question. How'd you come to that decision? Hey, let me know what ideas or thoughts you had before you decided to do that. They can be quasi questions, but the direct question tends to, especially if you have an external processor and someone's who a little more sensitive, feeling oriented, often feels like attack, even when it's not at all.
Yeah.
And so when there's those miscommunications, there are those movements. So how does that matter in like marital recovery, trauma recovery, when we're in our hypervigilance mode or we're in our fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I got to get them in the right order so I don't forget one. When we're in that modality, we're going to be more defensive. We're going to be more sensitive to what we perceive as positional statements or directional statements that can make us then sink further into whatever our style of traumatic response or confrontational response is.
And so what's kind of the glue of all this? So if you have someone who's maybe super intense and direct, it's bringing them down a little bit, and then the person who is, struggles with their maybe they just feel too much, and so they're not very direct and all those types of things, and they have to kind of, hey, let's be more direct. Is it this empathy between the couple? Like what is it that you're...
Yeah, the glue to this is understanding, and seeking understanding rather than seeking to be right. That is a great, tagline for, we're having a conflict. What do I hope the end result is? Well, sharks and directive and dogmatic and authoritative person, the only way the argument is beneficial is if they win. And so for those who are pleasers and internal and more introverted and more laid back, the only way to win the argument is to stop. Have no argument at all, right? So what happens in the Lord's sense of humor is there's often partnerships that have both sides, right? One's very, very strong, authoritative, and direct, and the other more indirect and passive and a receiver. Yeah. Nothing wrong. God wires us all the way he wires us, and then our experiences and temperament play into that. But when I'm coaching with couples in particular, if someone is too authoritative, too direct, too many questions, too much interrogation, what feels like interrogation, to the laid back, reserved, more passive responder, we're never going to get true, harmonious trust foundation of that bond in order to navigate the deeper soul issues. We'll navigate functionality, we'll navigate children and scheduling and church, but as far as getting to that true intimacy, soul to soul, heart to heart, mind to mind, it won't happen. And you'll often hear the partner in the lower position, the one who's more responsive, receptive, rather than directive and authoritative, say things like, my partner's not safe. Even though that partner would literally die for them in a millisecond, and both people know it. They would take a bullet, take a train for him. That's not the safety we're talking about. We're talking about the safety of the emotional response, the emotional. And a lot of the folks who are very directive and very authoritative and love accountability and challenge, they're not against the lower positional person's heart responses. In fact, they want them. But when they receive them, they tend to counter them so quickly or ask a bunch of further clarification, interrogation questions that it makes the turtle and the teddy bear and the panda responder just go, oh gosh, this was a terrible idea. And retreat, whoop, whoop, whoop. Somewhere I got to go hide. And then they're both frustrated. So that's when the more direct, assertive, authoritative one has to use different language. Statements there would be way more helpful. Calm the posture, calm the position, sit down if you can, rather than be so kinesthetic and bigger physical presence. Affirm the person first, right? It's the old sandwich theory. Hey, babe, I love you so much. Sometimes you confuse the daylights out of me, but man, do I love you. And have a smile on your face, not a look like I want to strangle you. Right? And then make some statements about, hey, it was confusing to me a little bit about, I thought we had made the decision about this and it seems like something else happened. I'm sure there was a reason. Can we walk through it? That's much better than, why were you late? What were you doing? What were you thinking? How could you possibly think that? Let's talk.
Yeah.
How do we want to talk there now for someone who's non-confrontational and non-conflictual? Yeah. So that's why the statement and the assurance of the bond, the assurance of the relationship, the we and us language. Let's do it better next time, honey. Is way better than, well, I hope you learned how to have a better argument next time. Right? Same exact phrase, same exact meaning. Yeah. One is way different than the other one.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I can only relate with my experiences, but just like a little cheat code for me has always been, and I understand this isn't everybody's situation. Some people are with a spouse who's maybe very mean and very cruel, but in our relationship, my thing has always been, I know her intent isn't to hurt me. Her intent isn't to be malicious. And so I can be angry, I can be upset, I can be triggered, I can be whatever you want to use to describe how I'm feeling. But if I can just pause and, okay, she is not trying to cause me pain. And if I can get there, then I can work through it, because whatever it is, whatever the misunderstanding is, whatever there isn't, we can get there. It might take time. It might take, but if I can start from that foundation, it really helps.
Absolutely. And we know Abby's character is sweet and kind and does not want to poke people to get them off their baseline and their formation. That's not true of many people.
Yeah.
You've worked for people. We know people, Judson. We have friends and family members. Angie does not care about my feelings in the middle of an argument or conflict. And I'm glad. But it took me a while to understand that.
You'd have to explain that one, because I literally don't understand.
I'll pick stuff that happened to us early in marriage as we were kind of figuring out each other's leadership style and our rhythms. But I would constantly tell her things like, I'll be home at 5 and show up at 6:30 and never apologize and never think it was a big deal. It was just like, well, I had things to do. This is before cell phones, right? It's before cell phones. I couldn't pull over on my way back from a counseling session when I was frustrated and tired, and it went an hour longer than it was supposed to go. And it was a crisis-oriented one, so I'm responsible to the state to meet that extra hour, right? There was some good reasons.
Yeah.
But when it was done, I'd be like, I'm just going to take my time getting home because I'm flustered. I want to pray. I want to think through. I want to sing. I want to drum. But I wouldn't think, oh, my wife's waiting to eat dinner with me an hour ago. And I just show up at home thinking everything's cool. And then when she says, hey, where were you? What was going on? I start counting her. I was working. Where do you think I was? Right. And then boom, we're escalating in a simple phone call, which I learned to do every time I left the office. Again, you got to know who your spouse is. My spouse is extremely organized, linear, structured, a time tasker, a schedule maker. Right. And so knowing who she is, I always now call her before I come home, no matter what the scenario, even if I'm going to be early. I'm going to call her, say, hey, wrapping up, coming home. And so that's an example where in the midst of that, when I constantly disregarded her rhythms and her style of life and her need for that order, and even was flippant about it, like she should just be glad she's got a husband who works so hard, right? Then she would come get me in the soul there a little bit, right? Come get in the heart a little bit there, and didn't mind if my feelings were hurt, so that I could identify and understand why her feelings were hurt, so we could find that process. But we're debaters and we're scrappers, and many couples aren't. Yeah. And so that's why for those couples who don't enjoy that level of intensity or challenge, confrontational connection, you have to figure out how to use the language and the we and the statement. And even if it never gets intense at all and stays completely congenial, that the truth and the authenticity is out. So for you, Tim and Abby, two more laid back, reserved, sweet, kind people who don't like to fight, right? And be sitting down and go, honey, I want to kind of walk through why I think I had a little attitude and I was a little frustrated, and I apologize. I'm just going to tell you the process from my perspective, right? I want to hear yours. I want to understand, right? It's how you set it up, how you present it. No voices need to be raised. No one's got to have these intense looks, right? So it's figuring out who each other are, understanding each other, and seeking to understand in the midst of whatever's going on that has now caused frustration or caused us to respond in a way where we're out of our normal zone, homeostasis, symmetry, spirit, right? Those of us who are believers in the Lord, where you feel in the spirit. And when that flesh gets ignited and you start being not the fruit of the spirit, you're no longer gentle, you're no longer kind, you're not even thinking about faithfulness, love and peace are out the window, joy is nowhere to be found, right? When you know you're in the flesh part as a believer, that's when you got to take a time out. You got to do and even tell your spouse that, hey, I appreciate this conversation. It's hard, but it's good. But I'm starting to feel out of sorts. I'm feeling out of spirit. Can I pray quick, or can I take a quick walk? And I promise to come back in, right? Not those of our friends who like to avoid and like to hide. You can't use that all the time and then never come back. I don't mean leave the house forever. I mean, don't come back to the conversation, because we need to make sure whatever those issues are, they tend to be much deeper than just the systemic at the top, right?
Yeah.
It's way deeper than just a time issue.
Yeah. The funny thing is, go ahead.
I was saying it's a trust issue, is a valuation issue that was going on, Angie and I, early in marriage.
Yeah, it's funny. Even though I can be an avoider, if she says, like, I want to talk about something, we'll talk about it tonight. I'm like, tell me now. I don't want to sit in the uncomfortability all day.
Yeah, that's
waiting.
Yeah, and sometimes that's very healthy, Tim, because like you said, it's going to get you off your balance.
Yeah.
Even if Abby said it with a kind, sweet look on her face, so you're not assuming there's something terrible going on.
Yeah.
It still can get you out of the window there for 6 hours. And you're like, can we just talk now quickly if we can?
Yeah, and she's the same way too. So if I try and pull that,
that's helpful.
Doesn't fly.
So because I work with so many couples very early in their marriage or preparing to get married, these take a lot of work. These take nuances of reflection, understanding, grace, forgiveness, acceptance, and trying to do little debriefs together without returning
There's
to
not some magic formula.
escalating.
There's not some magic formula you can just tell me. And
I don't think there's an A plus B equals C here, because all of us are so different and wired so differently.
Yeah.
But not being deathly afraid of the disagreement and not assuming that you're always going to be on the same page. I hate that phrase in marital dynamic because it's ridiculous. Are you always on the same page as your boss? No. But you have a job to do and you have responsibilities to do. You might not even be the same page with your people in the booth with you, or my psych department profs with me, right? That's not always the goal. That's not always even healthy. Get in the same book. That one I don't mind.
Okay.
Let's be in the same book.
What's your...
Yeah, let's be in the same book and occasionally have our chapters brush up against each other. But there's some things you're never going to agree on. You're two different people. Why would you expect to agree on everything? Why do we want that? We don't expect to agree with anybody else in the world about everything. All of a sudden we get married, we're like, we think the exact same way. We believe the exact same. No, you don't. And it'll unearth itself.
Yeah.
And so when it does, instead of being freaked out, go, oh, great, now we can learn.
An expectation can set you up for failure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And young couples and dating couples tend to say things like, well, if we have these issues now, we'll never make it. Or maybe I shouldn't marry this person because we disagree about how to serve the Lord. Why would that be a rule breaker? How about learn how to serve each other's ways and do both? Right? Why does it have to be the exact same? So there's elements there of our expectations, of our valuations, of unrealistic scenarios, cognitive distortions, all the cognitive behavioral therapy words that we could use, false beliefs, things like that, that if they're not unearthed and not shared, we don't grow. And because I talked with you guys about this as well as others, sometimes when those crises come up, they're the best blessing that can ever happen to our relationship, because it forces us to go deeper, figure out the differentnesses and where the rhythm misses or where the alignment misses, and how something that hurts one person might not hurt the other, and something that makes someone happy might not make the other one happy. And that's why learning how to use the we language, the us language, the affirmations, learning the differences between external and internal processors, introverts, extroverts, social tank fillers, isolation tank fillers, all those things. It takes time. That's why the research says, and I tell all my couples, 7 to 10 years to really find a rhythm that feels a little safer and a little stronger and doesn't feel as fluctuated by a bad mood or a bad day.
Yeah.
And you're probably right in that window now. I don't know how you guys, 12 years? What have you been?
12 years next month.
12 years. Wow. That was lucky. I didn't know it that well.
Nice
That's a lucky guess, but I would think you'd say that. Yes. That as you've moved in the second decade of marriage, I think you would say that, Tim, that, we understand each other so much better.
Yeah.
And can build now on those strengths of the differences rather than kind of try to tear down the differences and like, well, the way you're thinking is kind of wrong and you ought to think this way. Right. And we don't necessarily say that unless you're a shark, but we feel it. And then that changes our body position. It changes our nonverbal, our tone, our tenor. All those things are so discernibly different.
Yeah. Just to kind of button this up too, and be curious what you think about this, but something that really helped me, and I just heard this only recently within the past few years, but I always struggled with what the idea of covenant meant. You hear you're in a marriage covenant. It's like, oh, that sounds nice.
Yeah.
But I heard someone saying, when you're in a contract with somebody, if we're in a contract and you wrong me, then I'm taking the full force of the law to destroy you. If you break that contract, I'm gonna, sue you. I'm gonna do whatever to get my vengeance. But when you're in a covenant, it's not that I'm against you, but I'm against anything that would come against you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really helps me in my understanding with my spouse.
It's a great illustration, Tim, but even the way you explained it, I would change language a little bit.
Okay.
So covenant, whatever comes against us, not comes against her.
Darn it.
Right.
So close.
And you're such a protector anyway by nature. So this isn't like a big power change for you. I'm just trying to give you language because I think you do need to teach those things well. And a phraseology I've used before, and that's really good teaching, and it's making me want to go into a whole theological bent, and we don't have time. But contracts give us the reasons why we can break them.
Mm-hmm.
Covenants give us the reason on why we stay.
There you go.
Right. And that's a big deal to me. And so not having these back of the mind thoughts and sometimes it's understandable why we do. So I'm not telling, like you mentioned earlier, some people are in really rough marriages and people are getting really mistreated. So we're extremely sensitive to that. And sometimes breaking that contract and covenant is necessary for survival and health. We're realists here as much as we want all marriages and all romantic relationships to stay together. But otherwise, sometimes we're vulnerable. Sometimes we lived through a bunch of divorces growing up and we've struggled with our attachment, and we're always in the back of our head thinking things like, well, this will be the one that'll be the end. Or if they do this, it'll be the end. In my human sexuality class, Christian values and human sexuality class, I throw those kind of comments out to our students and make them wrestle with it. What kind of affair will be an affair that you can't come back from? Boy, that's a good question. They have really good responses.
Yeah.
Some are like, if my man or my woman's even flirting with someone else inappropriately, we're done.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? You got 3 kids, a big mortgage, you haven't worked for a while. You're just walking away because they flirted? Is that what covenantal relationship is? And then we, of course, turn it, Tim, to what is God's covenant with us? Covenantal theology, right, through Noah and David, Adam, Noah, David, all the way up through the line. It's like there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we have these automatic kind of protections, even though they're false protections to me, of, well, this will break the covenant? Yes, it can break the covenant, but it doesn't have to break the covenant. And what does that covenant look like? Even though at times the covenant means I no longer can allow you to be doing these type of things to us, to our family, to our kids, right? There's accountabilities with covenants. God lays them out all the time. So valuable question and thought and response there on Tim. Maybe we can do a follow-up and we can go more into the theological aspect of what does covenantal relationship and marriage really look like? Because I think our sexuality is often wrapped into covenantal love, or should be wrapped into covenantal love, and it's often not. We view sexuality almost outside of the covenant. Like, this is our fleshly little fun thing we get to do, but it's really not a part of worship. It's really not a part of the Lord. And I'm just like, no, we need to tie it intrinsically. Our spirituality and sexuality should be linked because it's our identity. It's part of who we are. It's a drive. So maybe we can do a follow-up on that one with or without Karin.
I had to add that
with Karin.
Theological aspect in there just to top it off.
No, that was good. That was good. And thanks for walking through this with us. And let me say a prayer.
Yeah.
Lord, we love you and we are inspired and encouraged by you. And these changes, Lord, in our language and our understanding and reflection of covenant and of joining and of partnership when we're hurt, when we're frustrated, when we're feeling demeaned, when we're feeling oppressed, when we're brand new in marriage and just trying to figure it out, or when we're going through a crisis. It's so difficult, Lord, not to get positional, not to get stuck in our own perceptions, and rather than seek clarity and understanding, we're seeking to be validated and right. Lord, that perspective can bring division, not healing. So, Father, it's complicated, it's difficult. We pray that you bind the evil one and separate him and get him out of any of our listeners' relationships and marriages and families that are suffering and hurting. May we, Father, see the covenant as you see the covenant. See our spouse as our greatest gift in the world. See our romantic partner as a person to be cherished and honored and affirmed and respected. And learn how to join, Lord, like you join. Learn how to heal and forgive and to be present and regulate ourselves and co-regulate with our partners and friends and families when we're feeling dysregulated, when we're feeling defensive and angry and not even sure why. So I ask, Lord, that you continue to do a mighty work in us and through us. We thank you for this time to process this today. on the show and pray you would bless your word and bless these words in your name and for your glory. Amen.
Love and Life with Dr. Karin and Pastor Elliott is produced by Tim May and executive producer Dr. Karin Anders-Nabel. For more information about Love and Life, please go to loveandlifemedia.com.